everyone, I'm Rebecca and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be taking a look at another item in my antique collection. Now I know that this does not look like much right now. That's because you're looking at the back of it, because the front of it does not nearly fit my dress form. This is honestly probably the smallest item that I have in my collection that is still, I believe, intended for an adult. Now, it is possible that this could be for a teenager, but I feel like we do not normally see a lot of jet beading on things for teenagers. So that's why it's like, it could possibly be, but I think it's for an adult. So I'm actually going to go ahead and jump right in, take this off of the dress form, lay it out flat for you, and that way we'll be able to look at it flat and you'll actually be able to see the real bodice, not, you know, the front of my dress form, and we can take a look at all of the little details that went into making this bodice. So this is what this bodice looks like when it is actually all closed up together. I believe that this bodice dates to kind of the mid, maybe even to late 1900s. And I say that because of things like the fullness of the sleeve, or the fact that there really isn't very much fullness to the sleeve. And also the fact that we kind of have this ruched gathered look here, but it is very much not a powder pigeon type look that we get earlier in the decade with like the flat front corsets and everything. This is actually quite flat. So I think we are starting to move into some different silhouettes with this. I think you can also see just from the way that it's laid flat here that this was not a particularly shapely woman. So I think you can see, like, look at this. It's pretty straight from bust to waist. I'll take measurements for you later on, but this is the gorgeous bodice. I hope you can see just how gorgeous this really is. We have a lot of jet beading here. Now, it is possible that this could have been part of mourning because it is all black. That said, I feel like a lot of times you don't tend to see a lot of jet beading on mourning stuff. Could be later in mourning, but all of it is black. We do have a lot of textures going on though. Besides the gorgeous jet beading, we have this sort of jacquard silk here. So I think you can see the detail in the weave there with the sort of leaf motif. And then we also have this diagonal stripe going on here. And then this fabric right here is actually just a twill. I believe it is a wool twill, but it creates a very different look than the silk because we've got the matte and the shiny, and then of course the sparkly in between. This bodice does have one of the many hallmarks of this era, which is a very, very complicated closure. So to get into this bodice, we have a lot of overlapping pieces here. So first we would have to undo the belt. Now, the belt portion here, it probably used to have hooks and bars. I don't see any of the bars remaining. There's definitely no hooks remaining. If there are bars still there, they're very, very well hidden within the edge of the beading. I can't see them at all. And then we have these sort of overlapped pleated sections here. So we've got one that just goes to the center right here, and then this one overlaps the other way, and then that overlap there. So that all undoes, but then we also have all of the overlapping in the collar section. So this entire section right here is coming from the left-hand side, and it just tucks up in here. Again, it probably used to have hooks on it. Does not have hooks on this upper portion anymore. And I feel like you can kind of see the scarring on this portion where there probably were hooks, but again, no hooks anymore. So this comes undone here, and then you can see we have the center of the bodice here. This bodice also has one of the items that I love on antique garments, which is the parts that don't show don't have to look nice. So we just have the brown polished cotton lining from the inside right there because it gets fully covered up by that piece there. Then here we have these two pieces that also overlap. So what I find interesting about this is that this side is what is overlapping here, whereas down here it was this side overlapping, but it just kind of comes together here, and then all of the hooks and eyes are on the middle section here. They do the alternating hooks and eyes, which was very, very common on really pretty much all Victorian and Edwardian antique bodices. I will go back and show you a little bit more in depth of the collar and sleeves afterwards, but let's go ahead, since we've undone this section here, and open up and look in the inside. So we're looking at a bodice that actually has quite a few pieces going on here. We actually have 4 pieces on each side with this lining here, and you can tell some of them go through to the outside, that's why the black shows up here, and some of them are actually just lining. So we have the seam here that's just in the lining. So we have the sort of fiddle back piece right here, and then a very narrow side back, even narrower side, and then the front piece, which has darts in the front piece. And of course we have the boning on really all of our seams and all of our darts. And I don't think any of the, oh, we do have a tiny bit of boning poking out. So we might be able to take a look at it. No, it doesn't want to pull out any further, but just looking from this little tip right here, I can pretty strongly say that that is baleen. Usually the baleen has a black look like that right there does before it gets to the tip. It is interesting that it is metal tipped though. A lot of baleen that you see actually doesn't have metal tips. Oh, and actually we have one that does poke out even a little bit more. You can see that black color there. Now it is possible that maybe it is like a tarnished metal steel of some sort, but baleen was a lot more common. I can't pull it out any further than that to really take more of a look at it, but that is what the boning looks like in there. You can also see how nicely they whipped the edges of the seam allowance when they were incorporating the wool. Now, obviously they did not do that when it was just the twill. They've really just scalloped it, but you can tell that it really has frayed when you're talking about just the cotton. So obviously it was a good idea to do the whipping right over here. I also love that you can see the giant tacking stitches for all of the beading in the front. So that's what this is. This is these giant stitches. These aren't to hold on the boning. These are to hold on the beaded trim that's right in the front there. Almost certainly, by the way, this is a trim. This was not like beaded directly onto the bodice. It would have been much more common for it to actually be a trim. And you can see the running stitches that go along the edge of the beading, they go up even higher. Interestingly enough, despite the rather flat-chestedness of this bodice, there is not actually any padding up in here. I know it does look quite wrinkly, like it could have padding. There's nothing under there. It's just that the cotton lining is quite wrinkly. Looking down here at the facing, you can also see that the facing was clearly done before the beading was put on, because again, we have those really, really large tacking stitches that are applying the beading to the front. I also do find it quite interesting that they decided to dip down the beading past where the bodice went, and because of that, they actually just tacked in this little satin backing piece that isn't part of like the actual shape of the bodice. It's an additional little piece that has the beading right on the other side. I did just notice too that in looking at all of the hooks and eyes, although a lot of our overlapping hooks and eyes are no longer there, we do have one on this little bit right here. We have the hook right here, and then over here, we have the eye right here. So that is where that hook goes to. I'm not sure what happened to the other hooks and eyes that would have been like on this piece, for example, or on the neck piece that we were looking at earlier. I do find it interesting that the collar is actually faced with an additional fabric here. So I'm not sure what exactly this fabric is. It feels kind of silky, so it is probably some sort of silk. It's almost like a ribbed silk. I think you can see the tiny little stripes in there, and it is sort of a dark brown color. And it's kind of its own little facing here that you can see has been applied with small hand stitches up at the top, and then it is incorporated in this binding that finishes off the neckline here. This just appears to be a twill binding. It looks like it's probably the same twill as the bodice, the twill of the bodice. The one other thing that I want to point out in this interior is that we do actually have skirt hooks here. So there's 3 hooks right here in the back, and that would have helped to keep the bodice down and attached to the skirt. So the skirt waistband would have sat like right about here. This would have dipped down just a little bit below, and those hooks would have kept it together with bars that would correspond on the skirt waistband. So I think that's about all to show you in the inside of the bodice. Let me go back and we'll take a look at the bodice construction, like how many pieces are on the outside, and also take a look at the sleeves. So first I just want to point out this really, really nicely shaped collar. It has gotten a little wrinkled over time and it's wanting to fold back, but it really is quite lovely. And I'll show you more of it when we're in the back as well. But we've got these huge pieces coming off here, and this is of that same silk, and the back is backed with the wool twill. I believe there is also a structure layer within because it definitely feels heftier than the bodice itself, but it's got a really cool cut up here. And this was actually all faced just by like whip stitching it in. It's not like turned right sides together or anything. So they created that, folded over the edges, and then whip stitched in the backing. As far as the sleeves go, we have very, very small amount of gathering up at the top of the sleeve head. And then this is a 2-piece sleeve. So we have a little bit of fullness in the upper arm, but it comes down to pretty much just a completely fitted sleeve down here by the bottom. And I really like the little detail that we have of adding those 2 little flaps, if you will, of the satin. Sorry for the contrast on here. I know black doesn't tend to like to show up with the white background, but we've got that little detail there. You can see the inside. So that was just applied over the edge after the sleeve was already finished. And the sleeve is faced with twill as well down here. It's probably the same twill as the outer. I think it looks quite similar. And then we have the brown polished cotton lining on the inside. So the brown polished cotton lining, that was flat lining. I don't know if you can see the seam in here. It's a little dark, but I think you can see the seam right there. So that's how you know that it is flat lined. This also has the elbow gathering that was really quite common in a 2-piece sleeve of that time, so we get that little bit of extra fullness in the elbow form movement. Okay, let's flip her over and look at the back. But first, I just want to point out the interesting shape of the collar where it does separate in the back here, but it's a really, really wide collar, almost like the depth of a sailor collar. And we also have a little hook right here. Now, it's possible that this could have been some sort of collar decoration or even some sort of additional collar, but most likely it was some sort of a decoration like a large bow or a large rosette, since that was very popular at this time. Now, if you remember from the inside, we had a center back seam and 2 back pieces here, but that didn't go through to the exterior. Likewise, the inside had a sort of curved princess seam right about here, because I can feel the bone right underneath. And so the back was made up of, I think, 4 pieces, whereas this really only has the 1 piece back. I'm always amazed when people can fit things like that, where you have different structure like on the inside than you do on the outside, and yet it all comes together the same. We do also have our tiny little side piece right here, just like we do on the inside, but then it wraps over to just the front piece here, and that goes all the way to the center front. So overall, fairly basic construction there. So as far as the measurements go, we are looking at about a 23-inch waist and then about a 29-inch bust. So again, not too much difference between waist and bust there, only 6 inches, and also just very, very small. I believe that I had taken this down to where I could fit like about a 25-inch waist on this, if I remember correctly, but obviously we're quite a ways off with this bodice, which was why it did not remotely fit. Also, the shoulders are just much too small to fit on the dress form. So yeah, very, very tiny, but that is why it is in such good condition. I know I've talked about this in a lot of my other antique videos, but again, things can remain in good condition because they're not wearable. And that is why we have so many antique pieces still in existence that are so tiny. Do please remember that there were people of all shapes and sizes throughout all of history. Yes, plus size people did exist. Yes, I know we don't have that many pieces of extant plus size clothing left. That was because they were either worn to death because everyone could wear them, or they were cut down for other family members to become different sizes over time. And that is why they don't exist, because plus size people did exist. There's a lot of people out there who don't believe that, and that makes me sad. And in particular, that is why we get so many of the really, really tiny things that tend to be in kind of the best condition, because they were worn by like the first person who had them, put in a trunk, and no one else wore them ever again, and no one made anything out of them because the pieces were too small. So that's my little soapbox right there. Plus size people existed. Antique clothing is small because of survival bias. Plain and simple. So anyway, hopefully you have enjoyed this look at another piece in my antique collection. I am kind of getting down to the bottom of my antique collection. I think I mentioned this in my last video, but I'm no longer actively collecting. And I think at this point I have about 4 or 5 pieces left in my collection that I have not yet showed you. So I will be showing you those pieces throughout the next several months here, probably doing one of these videos once every couple of months. But then I guess that is it. So you'll have to go back to the playlist of all of the other videos of antiques that I've done in the past, because I think I've done like 25 to 30 of them at this point. So they're all linked in a playlist that will be right up here and also down below in the description if you want to go check that out. But if you liked this video, please go ahead and click the thumbs up icon. And if you'd like to see more videos like this from me, please go ahead and click subscribe and the little bell icon to be notified every time I post a new video. I do post videos here on YouTube at least once a week, with my sewing vlogs out on Tuesdays and sometimes additional content like this out on Saturdays, but I post every day over on my Instagram, so please go follow me on Instagram. That's at Lady Rebecca Fashions. And if you'd like to help support all of the work that I do on this channel, I do have a link to my Patreon and my Ko-fi down in the description below, or you can send me a super thanks right here on YouTube. I'd also like to give a special shout out to my Edwardian level patrons, Sharon, Mirage, Laura, Jean, and Janelle. Thank you all so much for joining me today. I hope you all have a wonderful week, and I will see you very soon in my next video. Happy sewing!